All the things going on around the world. Jim Awad joins us again. Jim, thanks for taking a few minutes today for a liquid lunch with us.
Pleasure.
And you've been on before. You've been around for nearly a half a century, and you understand the global markets and geopolitical impacts of this stuff. And first, I want to talk to you about the trade war and the tariffs. Many people think that, it's isolationist for us to put on these tariffs and, it hurts the consumer. When I do the breakdown of what they're talking about, it breaks down to in a household of 5 people, like $1 or $2 a day. That could really be the impact. What's the real impact to us as a country and our Western democracy and what Trump is doing right now?
All right, so the big picture, the strategic picture, is we are importantly trying to change our relationship with China to a more balanced, with intellectual property protection, more balanced trade, and that is an admirable and necessary goal in the long term. The question is, how do you get there? And Trump is his own man. He's like nobody we've ever had before as president. He's got a definitive style. He likes to negotiate, and he's negotiating hard. And we won't know for a while whether he achieves his goals and what the damage is in between. What you have to say is that the uncertainty of the tariffs is starting to affect business spending, business psychology, business planning. And that will ultimately filter through to the consumer. So what Trump has to do is push the Chinese as long and as hard as he can to get them to loosen up and do more of what he wants without, in the process, pushing us into a recession. Not to say we're going to have a recession, but the longer the tariffs go on, the more you increase the possibility that we trip into a recession. So it's a very difficult balancing act, and it's one where you have to stay tuned. You can't yet forecast what's going to happen. Happily, right now, as we sit today, we can say the U.S. economy is still growing, employment is still growing, profits are still growing, money is flowing into the country because we're the best game in town. So right now, the tariffs are a nuisance and a crawling negative, but not a crippling negative.
And I have told our audience many times that one of the things the markets hate most, it's not geopolitical, it's not tariffs, it's uncertainty.
Yes.
Markets and people who do modeling don't like the variables of I don't know.
Right.
And I think now Trump has been pretty clear. The tariffs are in place, and he's put a stake in the ground to say, hey, this is how I'm negotiating. No one's ever done this. Obama kept drawing lines in the sand, and people would cross them, and he didn't do anything about it. Trump's done something about it. Isn't it creating a little certainty when he says, hey, they're in effect now, and it can only get better?
Well, we understand that they're in effect, and people can model that. If I were his counselor, what I would suggest to him is that Mnuchin or somebody in his administration hold a weekly press conference on the subject of the negotiations with China, lay out measurables, what we're trying to achieve, where we are achieving them, where we're not achieving them, so businesses can see in real time where we are rather than just in a vacuum and name calling and a retaliation back and forth. That would give you more certainty without compromising Trump's very worthy long-term goal here of rebalancing the relationship in an important way. So if you could give progress reports to businesses weekly or every other week, I think that would reduce the uncertainty and allow businesses to sort of gauge where we are in the process and plan their capital spending and hiring accordingly.
Mr. Awad, the interesting thing with the tariff policy of going forward with free trade, whether it's NAFTA, CAFTA, WTO, free trade agreements with countries like China, is it's largely over the last 25 years been bipartisan. President Bush, President Clinton, the other President Bush, President Obama, by and large all had the same policy, which is pushing through as many free trade agreements as they could. And one of the things, one of the reasons we saw that is because the donor class and a lot of these big businesses, they're the biggest beneficiaries of free trade because they get the cheap labor and they get to still sell to American consumers. Now that you're seeing President Trump sort of take a step back from that bipartisan free trade policy, why do you think the Wall Street crowd and the donor class is still so loyal to him? I mean, if you look at his fundraisers, whether it's at the Hamptons or here in Manhattan or anywhere else, they're filled with Wall Street people, the very same people that have benefited from these free trade agreements.
Right. So what I would say is that that donor class intellectually supports what Trump is trying to achieve. with China, that they have been taking a lot of money out of our system, ripping off our intellectual property, taking advantage of us, and that they support what he's trying to do. With some of them, the longer the tariffs go on and the longer they affect the economy, people will start to question his means, his methods, his implementation, without questioning his goals. Now, people, everybody, they always say vote with their pocketbooks. And whether Trump gets elected or not, I think will largely depend on what the economy looks like in September, October, a year from today. And if these tariffs don't achieve their goal and the trade war stays on and the damage incrementally gets worse, I think his support from the donor class will erode. But he dearly wants to get elected. It's a matter of personal pride to him. So I think he's going to do everything he can to go to the brink and then get the best deal that he can given the conditions. The risk is we get to 2020 and we are where we are, and maybe even more tariffs, and we trip into a recession. The one thing we all don't understand completely is the Asian mentality, where pride is very important, where they don't want to seem like they've bent down to the Americans. So you want to pressure them as much as you can in a rational and disciplined way without backing them into a corner where in front of their own people they have to seem strong and get nationalistic, and what that would imply would be waiting Trump out through 2020. And the incremental negative effect of the tariffs on the economy will only increase. So it's a very difficult process over the next 12 months.
It is difficult, but at this point, we've been pushed around by China for a long time. We've been ripped off. They've been dumping steel, unfavorable labor practices. They pollute more than anyone in the world. They don't hold themselves to any standards. They don't spend any money on this stuff. When you say, well, you know, he has a delicate balance there, if you ask me, we're in a street fight with China now.
Right.
This is the first president to point it out because everybody else has been bowing down on our side.
Yes.
We're in a street fight now. When you're in a street fight, yeah, I understand that, you know, the other side, you got to give them room so they can save face and all this. But that's like getting into a street fight and saying, hey, by the way, hang on a minute. He doesn't like if you kick him. Don't kick because that insults him. Or don't go after his eyeballs because that's out of bounds. At this point, I feel like Trump's the first person to stand up to him. And if they get insulted, maybe they'll figure out ways to save face for themselves without having to get into World War III.
Right. Well, everything you said is valid, but there can be side effects to that. If we're in a street fight and it continues for the next year, it may be the right thing to do in the United States' national interest over the long term. But there could be some short-term pain in terms of economic activity and recession. We may look back in 10 years and say it was absolutely worth it. But it could cause a short-term negative in terms of growth, and that will have implications for his re-election process. But it's way too early to measure that. So there is bipartisan support for what Trump is doing. The whole country is behind him. Some people are questioning his methods and whether it could be more measured, disciplined, transparent, so we could understand exactly how the negotiating process is going. But everybody supports what he's trying to do.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Jim Awad is one of the most learned men out there. If you want to know what's going on in the global markets and the global economy, stay tuned to this show. Watch it afterwards if you didn't hear the whole thing, because these are some of the best insights we can bring you. And to me, one of the effects of this could be manufacturing coming back to the U.S., people making more stuff here, more jobs, people buying more U.S. goods. So that could be an effect also. You're watching Liquid Lunch. We're coming back right after this with independent journalist Andy Ngo.